Well, I grew up in a typical American home, the sad home, standard American diet. And I had chronic ear infections, took antibiotics so many times as a child that I had an allergic reaction at age 7 to penicillin. My parents were both chain smokers, so I had chronic strep throat, bronchitis, all of that stuff. So when I was 21, I was like, I had mono for a month where I just couldn't barely get out of bed. And then I started to have a lot of digestive symptoms. And basically that year turned into a spiral of getting diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Oh, my hair fell out. I had alopecia, which is bald spots. Just so many, like the autoimmune train kicked off, And I was also diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is an autoimmune liver condition where the bile ducts become scarred, inflamed and scarred.
Oy, oy, oy.
I traveled to a specialist who told me that I'd need a liver transplant within 10 years and I wouldn't be able to have kids. But a part of me has a rebel spirit. So even when they were saying this, I was just like, no, this is not going to be true for me. We could just skip ahead right now to 20 years later. I have never had surgery for any of these conditions. And I have 2 healthy children that were born naturally, conceived naturally with no complications at all for me or them. So I guess it's kind of like that free spirit rebel nature got me through the health diagnosis and everything else. Not to say that it was easy or anything, but it was just like deep down a gut knowing that just because the doctor says it doesn't mean that it has to be true.
Welcome to today's episode of the Eat, Live, Feel Better podcast, where I sit down with Angela Perger, a mother, yoga instructor, podcast host, and Ayurveda professor with a determined rebel spirit that gives her strength when times are tough. Angela has battled most of her adult life with ulcerative colitis, a painful inflammatory condition that flares up in the colon. Her healing journey led her to explore a number of wildly different, restrictive specialized diets. Each diet she tried worked for a time until it didn't. Ultimately, she ended up with some combination of all of them that works for her. It's a middle way that she discovered through Ayurveda. I absolutely love and appreciate how real and approachable Angela is when sharing her story with us. Her personable manner, ease of laughter, and open attitude flows naturally from the many people she's helped as an Ayurveda practitioner, and also from the super popular Simple Ayurveda podcast, which has 242 episodes right now and over 1 million downloads so far. Rebel spirit indeed. Tuck in, my friends. This is a good one. So hi, Angela. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat too.
Awesome. So I know that you're an Ayurveda practitioner, and I know that you have been practicing for a really long time and that you have incredible stories to tell about Ayurveda and your own life and how that's evolving in your business and how you've explored Ayurveda as a treatment option and other treatment options. And you've grappled and wrestled with all kinds of things, just like most of the people watching here today. So I'm really excited to hear more about your story. So maybe we could get started with you sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Well, I grew up in a typical American home, the sad home, standard American diet. And I had chronic ear infections, took antibiotics so many times as a child that I had an allergic reaction at age 7 to penicillin. My parents were both chain smokers, so I had chronic strep throat, bronchitis, all of that stuff.
The kapha childhood stuff.
Yeah. And then I was the first in my family to go to college. I moved away. When I moved away, I kind of like had in my mind, like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be my own person. And then when I got there, it was actually really lonely and isolating, and it was emotionally difficult, and I didn't have any kind of tools to handle it. This was back in 2000. So after 2 years, I switched schools where I had friends, and I moved in with them. And the second I got there, I became sick. I got mono.
Oh, God.
I know now, like kind of looking back into this story and like putting the pieces together, it's like the 2 years that I was at in college on my own. I was in that fight or flight stage. And then when I moved in with my friends, it was kind of like the crash, how you always get sick on vacation or something. Like you feel comfortable, your body's like, okay, we can.
Absolutely. I
Um,
actually, fortunately, this time I got sick the week before my vacation. I was like, okay, getting that out of my system.
that was nice of your body to cooperate like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when I was 21, I was like, I had mono for a month where I just couldn't barely get out of bed. And then I started to have a lot of digestive symptoms. And basically that year turned into a spiral of getting diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Oh, my hair fell out. I had alopecia, which is bald spots, just so many, like the autoimmune train kicked off, And I was also diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is an autoimmune liver condition where the bile ducts become scarred, inflamed and scarred.
Oy, oy, oy.
I traveled to a specialist who told me that I'd need a liver transplant within 10 years and I wouldn't be able to have kids. I really had no tools to process anything like emotional processing. And it wasn't until a decade later, I would say, yeah, over a decade later, like in my 30s, I was like, oh, that was kind of traumatic to hear that at age 21. But a part of me has a rebel spirit. So even when they were saying this, I was just like, no, this is not going to be true for me. And I didn't know how, and I didn't know why, and I couldn't exactly, like I don't know, but
That
so
helps. That spirit really helps, that belief that, you're going to get better, that you're going to get through this. That's essential. I mean, you've gotten through so much. Please carry on.
yeah, I think it was like kind of that same rebel spirit of like growing up in a home where like no one in my mom's side had ever gone to college. So I was like, I'm getting a scholarship. I mean, I worked at Denny's. I don't know if you've been to a Denny's, it's a diner. And I paid for my dorm room with that, with those tips. And my family was like, just live at home and go to community college. And I'm like, no, I had like that, free spirit. So I guess it's kind of like that free spirit, rebel nature got me through the health diagnosis and everything else. Not to say that it was easy or anything, but it was just like deep down a gut knowing that just because the doctor says it doesn't mean that it has to be true.
Yeah, I really want to highlight that for everyone watching here. Like,
Yes.
that's such an important message. So many people get that diagnosis and they're like, okay, so how do we treat this? How do I live with this? But Angela's saying, you don't necessarily have to take that route. There is another way. Awesome.
Yeah. And we could just skip ahead right now to 20 years later. I have never had surgery for any of these conditions. And I have 2 healthy children that were born naturally, conceived naturally with no complications at all for me or them. So
Amazing. Yeah. You showed them wrong. You proved them wrong.
yeah. Yeah. I don't even know that doctor's name, and he's probably retired or passed on, but
Well, we won't be hard on them. They're just doing what they know. They don't know
exactly.
that the true power in the human spirit and what we're actually capable of. But we know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So in the beginning, I did have to take some prescriptions to kind of get everything under control. And then basically in my 20s, I was able to like have a totally normal life and everything. Yeah, like with the prescriptions, like I just ate like a regular healthy-ish diet. So I knew food was connected, but I didn't quite know how or have the right information. And this is also I mean, I didn't even have my own computer or a cell phone or anything during this time. So this was going to the computer lab to type papers, and the internet was very slow and clunky. So there wasn't the kind of information, like I had never heard of Ayurveda. I had never heard of yoga yet either during all of this. So this was like a true inner knowing when you don't even have the internet to back it up.
I hear you. Sorry, it took me a minute to
Yeah.
get on board with that. Yeah. And no, I was just also reflecting on, how I discovered Ayurveda through a book, on a bookshelf.
Right.
Things were different back in the day.
Yeah, like such a slower leak of information and just yeah. And back then you had to be like hungry for the information and seek it out. And now the opposite, there's so much information that we have to be discerning and really decide who we're going to trust and what our source is going to be.
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, basically, I went on to become a teacher. I'm from Florida. I moved to New York City and went to grad school there to become a teacher. And then I lived in Philly for a couple of years and taught in inner city. And so while I was teaching in Philadelphia, that's when I started practicing yoga.
Okay.
Going to a studio in person, and I fell in love. And then I just made such a difference in my life. Just, that peaceful feeling of going to yoga class when you leave, the amazingness.
And I guess
Yeah.
too, like that must have, I'll ask, did it help you to get in touch with your body? Because I feel like when we're dealing with a lot up here, getting in touch with the body is so powerful.
Oh, it makes me laugh. I think about I did not even like Shavasana at first because my mind was racing and I'm like, okay, well, I got the workout. I can leave now, but I have to look for 10 minutes first. Yeah, I definitely started going I was like, you can work out barefoot, like the exercise part. But I think anyone who started yoga because of the exercise part knows that the magic of yoga seeps in no matter what, no matter what your initial motivation for going to class was. And yeah, so of course it helped, it totally transformed the way I think about everything. And because I was teaching in inner city and the children had really difficult lives, at that time, I'd never even heard of a kid's yoga teacher training or anything like that. So when the studio I was going to had the 200-hour training, I remember asking one of the teachers, can I do this even if I don't want to teach yoga to adults? And she's like, yeah, of course you can do it for self-growth. I did the yoga teacher training. That's when I was introduced to Ayurveda. I thought it was fascinating, but like many people, I was totally confused by the introduction. Oh, so we could jump forward a little bit. Again, my colitis and my liver condition were completely managed just because they weren't in a flare state. It's possible to go a long time. Yeah, the yoga.
Yoga, but also maybe because you were young. I mean, usually, disease worsens or appears later in life. Just the natural process of life, right? I guess from an Ayurvedic perspective, when we're young, we're kapha and we're full of juice and lubrication and extra protection, right? Those are the things that actually protect us from inflammation. And then we get into midlife and the busy time of life, and that's all pitta, right? That's all action, that's all passion, that's all problem solving, that's all the fire, and that's the stuff that fuels inflammation. So maybe it was just time of life as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many. Also, talking about that subtle underbelly of energetics. It was a time in my life when I moved to New York City and then I was living in Philadelphia. I had a lot of freedom. It was fun, not much responsibility other than taking care of myself.
Correct. Yeah. But those children, I'm sure those children definitely started to stir things up in you, working with.
Yeah, it was a very emotional experience working there for sure.
At some point, the ulcerative colitis flared up. What were you experiencing?
Yeah, so I ended up moving to New Jersey where my now husband's business and life is. We kind of met when I was in Florida and he was in New Jersey, and I moved to New York and Philly and kind of all around. I avoided the suburban life for a long time. I can date and I'll live in the city, but I eventually moved to the suburbs with him. I had my son, and then postpartum, I've always gotten colonoscopies every other year. And I even have a podcast episode for anyone that has to go through a colonoscopy. How can you go about it in the most Ayurvedic, gentle way? Because these type of experiences disturb vata. And so how can we prepare, go through and post as grounded as possible and as easy on the digestive system and as easy without aggravating vata? And so, as you know, anything we have to do in quote unquote real life, that it's just, there's no way around it for some of us, using Ayurveda as a tool to help soften those effects.
Nice.
But anyway, so the postpartum one showed inflammation, and that's really when I kickstarted. When I was first diagnosed, they recommended the brat diet: bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. So the toast part's not very Ayurvedic, but cooked apples, cooked bananas, and rice are sort of Ayurvedic for when you're experiencing digestive distress and just to kind of calm the system, especially the rice.
You're right.
So that automatically, even though my doctors had always said food has nothing to do with it, I just felt like, well, if eating these certain foods soothes the system, even now I've kind of come around to maybe the food isn't the total cause of it, but once there's aggravation, and this is for really any condition, it's like maybe the food isn't the total cause of disruption in your life, but once things are really disrupted and chaotic, simplifying the food helps to just calm the system and not continue aggravating it.
Correct.
When that inflammation showed up postpartum, and now obviously learning more about Ayurveda, the whole giving birth experiences is a complete vata experience. I mean, your organs are moving, things are coming out of your body, not just the baby, but the placenta and the fluids, and things have to be rearranged. And from the Ayurvedic perspective, the postpartum period is a really delicate time in a woman's life. And in American culture, we just don't honor that in a strong enough way. And even though I didn't have to go back to work right away or anything like that, I still, I was not properly resting or eating the right foods or having like full on support, like what's really needed for the postpartum experience. So for the inflammation just kind of started then, and it's been an on again, off again thing ever since.
So now you're dealing with real symptoms, and you must have thought you weren't quite into Ayurveda yet, I guess. You weren't quite there yet. Okay, so what did you do next?
Well, this is where I went on the journey of all the diets. So this was, I guess, in 2013. So the internet was around by then. So I found the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology syndrome diet, which is the bone broth, no carbs. So I got the book, I got all the downloads from the internet of the food list, and I followed that perfectly, which was so it was a big change because through yoga teacher training, I became mostly vegetarian, a little bit pescatarian, and I was eating a lot of salads, kale smoothies, all the vata aggravating so-called healthy American foods, which of course, that could have been an aggravator along with the pregnancy.
Those are rough. And, with the leafy greens, that's actually increasing movement through the digestive tract.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't have that knowledge yet. So I was basically eating, all stuff to get your digestion moving quickly. And my symptoms were always urgent and too frequent of bowel movement. That's a colitis flare, basically. And so that's why something like rice or just gentle foods or cooked.
Sweet, cooked, demulcent, soft.
Yes. So I was eating the opposite, of course, trying to be healthy. So then when I discovered the GAPS diet, it includes a lot of animal protein and bone broth. And at the time I was really on the path of like mostly vegan, vegetarianish. So
big shift.
I looked up the Weston A. Price Foundation to find some ethical animal products.
Yeah.
An Amish farm that had a co-op that was 2 hours away that delivered like once a month.
Yeah.
And I packed up my 1.5-year-old and we drove and visited the Amish farm.
Wow.
I wanted to see these animals for myself to make sure they were actually treated nicely. And we had lunch with an Amish family. And it's funny because my husband had to work. He couldn't go on this little road trip with me. So if you've ever driven with a baby or a toddler by yourself and I had all this junk, I had a pinwheel to like blow to keep them entertained and like baby toys and rattles. And we pull up to the Amish house and I've got all this junk piled on the front seat of the car that I'm like waving as we're driving in case he needs distraction. And then, like these children have no toys. They're playing with rocks and
gosh.
So I was like, wow, I thought I was a minimalist. And I'm like, no.
That is a cute story. Yeah.
So I started doing the GAPS diet. My symptoms for colitis went away so quickly. I was taking a very low dose prescription that said to be like an aspirin for your gut. That's what my doctors described it as. So I always was uncomfortable with that though. I never wanted to be on a prescription. To me, I didn't like the idea. I don't trust big pharma and all of that. I really don't trust the doctors either. So I was able to wean off my prescription and I wasn't taking any medication for a while. And I was like, wow, like I'm feeling really great. I'm eating this bone broth diet, no prescriptions. And because of the autoimmune liver condition, I get scans once a year. And then they found a spot on my liver that for 3 months, they weren't sure what it was, if it was cancer or the progression of the bile duct scarring. So I had to live in that unknown. And it ended up being scarring of the bile duct. It was so minute. That's why they couldn't tell what it was for a while. They had to pass it around to some different specialists. This is also, the PSC is a very rare condition. I have yet to meet a doctor who really understands it or has any information about it, to be honest. So that's like another, we were talking a little bit before we started this conversation about just like the spiritual aspect. There's been so many unknowns thrown that really has prodded me along toward more trust.
Right. Yeah, we need to
no
build up that trust by hearing the diagnosis, and then how do we react or respond to that? And if we can find a place of faith, and then if it's proven true, right? If you're like, oh, I really did get better, or it really was nothing, then we build up that trust. And yeah, that trust is critical for facing down. I like to call it like facing down disease, and finding that place of strength in the mind and the emotions and the spiritual, side of us, that plays a hugely significant role in any healing journey, alongside whatever you do, in the physical realm to help yourself.
I mean, since then, like as I've wrapped my mind around some of this, I just feel like, yeah, part of it is like that momentum of karma, of things to work through and let it soften you, kind of like the rock in the tumbler that turns into a gemstone. So at the time I was like, well, maybe it was the animal products. Like maybe it was just going too much from greens to animal products,
Sorry to interrupt you, animal products tend to be pitta aggravating if they're in excess, and the liver is a pitta organ. So yeah, maybe.
Right. And the thing about these type of diets, like the GAPS it's not just like a paleo diet where you can eat sweet potatoes too. I mean, you're not eating any carbs, like, even I think like I could eat a spaghetti squash or something. Like that was like the extent.
Just meat, basically.
I mean, you can eat like leafy greens and things, if you tolerate them. But yeah. And it's also the premise of it is super strict. So again, it's not like some other things that I've tried since then where, like with keto, you might eat it 6 days a week and cheat or eat something non-keto for 1 day a week. And you're not necessarily like ruining the whole thing from their perspective. Whereas the GAPS is like, if you eat one bite, you forget it. Like, why bother? So I had to let that go. And then I tried some other things. I've tried paleo and things like that. By then I was teaching in a yoga studio, and one of my yoga students was studying Ayurveda. And so that kind of brought me back to Ayurveda from my original learning about it. So I got some consults from her. And by then I was also diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which came around during pregnancy. So she was working with me for a little bit. And then she said, this is beyond my scope. Why don't you see my teacher? And at this point, I had also seen a naturopath. And each one of these people would give suggestions. And it's not that the suggestions might not have been helpful, but for me, none of them provided a full foundation of what an Ayurvedic lifestyle looked like. So to suggest herbs or to suggest doing this in your yoga practice or something, I guess I kind of just knew there's something more here. There's a piece of Ayurveda I'm just not getting. Like I'm taking my regular life as it is, which I was a yoga teacher by this time. And I was living like trying to be sattvic lifestyle, but there were still like little pieces that weren't that I was aggravating my own constitution. Well, for example, when I had moved to New Jersey, I was invited to come teach at a power yoga studio. And I was never into the 90-degree hot room, but I wanted friends and I liked the community. So I drank the Kool-Aid and I started, I did the teacher with them and I became a power yoga teacher. And they had childcare at this studio, which was awesome for the morning. So I either taught or took the morning class every single day.
Things you're doing that you don't know are harming you. That's a cause of disease in Ayurveda, right?
Right. And so I would pack my smoothie. So I'd get out of the hot room and then I'd go drink my cold smoothie right after every day, made from my organic ingredients, of course. So it's like things like this that I thought were healthy. And it's not that they're not healthy. And for some people, it might be okay, but not for my body and not for my type.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all these like little things. And then there were some other things that I didn't understand. Like we say the word mindful eating, but I'm sure I'm sure for everyone on this path, the evolution of what mindful eating is really shifts over time.
There's a lot to it. That's squarely in my area of expertise. That's what I teach.
Yeah. I mean, so for example, like I had gone to a holistic doctor, I had seen the Ayurveda practitioner, and this is not knocking them because when you're only in a consult for 1 hour and someone has a serious health problem, there's a lot to cover, but
so much to cover. Yeah. I'm glad you said that because an Ayurveda practitioner should catch those big things in your life, but it takes a lot of time and effort. So for anyone who wants to be helped by an Ayurveda practitioner, right, prepare to spend a good amount of time and maybe also pay for that, because to really get that full consultation and support that Ayurveda provides, it does take, many, many hours of exploration.
She might have said something to me, but when you're a pitta, right? and you're trained to like think like, what's the herb? What's the thing I need to take to fix me? If she like casually dropped in like, oh yeah, like chew your food well, I might have been like, that's not that important. I want to know what the herb is or what's the cooking technique.
Everything is about timing, and everything is about the person's willingness and openness to the information. Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah. So I take responsibility that if it was dropped in conversation, I wasn't listening or I wasn't ready or, I wasn't looking to something that simple to be the helpful thing.
Yeah.
So basically when the one student said, I think you should see my teacher, that's when I had this moment of, I don't want to go to another person. I want to study for myself. And I went on Nama's website, scrolled through. At this time, I had an infant and a 4-year-old. So I knew I wasn't going to be going away anywhere. So I had to find an online program, found one. I signed up, like, I don't know if it was that day or the next day, but once I decided, I was just like, I'm doing this. And the program that I had originally signed up for, the first 3 months were all about you. So it was really like their own little separate, get your life in order before we teach you anything.
Yeah. Well, that's very Ayurveda. That's awesome.
Yeah. So for me, that 3 months of following that program, I started experiencing such changes.
Sure. What changes did you experience?
My teacher was very strict about not going out to eat, not getting takeout. So getting an Instant Pot and making all my own food, not having the smoothies anymore.
That is huge.
Like making every single meal from scratch. She was really strict about leftovers. I've softened a little bit since then, just because real life with children.
Exactly.
But so right away, what really stood out, even though I signed up for digestion, the biggest transformation was my mood and energy level right away. Just more energy, better mood, less feeling of rushing around. I guess in some ways, when you really truly cook every single meal from scratch, like every lunch and dinner is fresh mung beans and rice, you're forced to be home a lot. So you kind of just cut out anything that's not essential.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I went through that process of really eliminating things. I dropped the smoothies, started, taking a thermos with me instead, told the studio owner, I don't think I can teach in 90 degrees anymore. So we agreed to open the doors and turn the heat off for my room. I wasn't ready to give up my community yet. So it's like, how can I make this work?
That's cute.
It was a process. I obviously eventually dropped power yoga totally. And now I practice yoga nidra every day.
Cool. Cool.
But it was a slowly letting go. And I think, it was like the word humane just popped in my head. It's like Ayurveda isn't about changing your whole life in one day. And so just slowly like letting it seep. I remember drinking a cup of coffee one time, or maybe it was the second cup, and I could feel like the ping in my eyes and I could feel my heart racing. And it was like these things that before I truly committed to Ayurveda, I didn't notice. They were still there. I just didn't notice them because I am a Pitta constitution. So I'll just plow through things if I'm excited about it. And just that realization, like walking out of our yoga room and being like, wow, this is actually aggravating Pitta dosha, which is the driver of colitis. Like this habit that's, I think of as good for me because of my personal, like it's okay for some people with kapha constitution, but for me, it's aggravating. It's not helping.
Wow. I love how you tell that story of like being attached to the community and the environment and what you were doing and even how it made you feel, right? Because when we're imbalanced, we tend to get attached to how things that make us further imbalanced. And so for a while you were in that state, and then sort of one day you really gained the awareness and you realized, oh, wait a sec, this state that I'm in after doing this yoga isn't serving me. It's not the way I want to feel, right? And that is what's required to motivate change. That's why I love Ayurveda personally, because once you make that awareness that, oh, this food doesn't make me feel good, and then you decide that that's not the way I want to feel, then that is a compelling reason to change. It's not a I should change. It's a I want to change. And so that is actually the best way to fuel change. So it sounds like you made that realization. You even tried something, can I still make it work by opening the doors? And I'm like, oh shoot, still can't. And then eventually you let it go and found a practice that was more supportive. It's just a perfect example. Thanks for sharing this.
I love how you phrase that because I think for me, I will do what someone says. I will take the food list or the whatever list for a while.
Yeah.
But then the rebel spirit, I don't want to, and I think that's what drew me to want to study for myself was because I want to know what do the ancient texts say versus the list handed to me by someone.
I wanted to get it for yourself. Like a lot of people say that Ayurveda is about kind of relearning what we already know, or my teacher has said it's about assimilating the information. Right? There's so much information. People don't realize what we actually study when we're learning Ayurveda. I mean, it's thousands of hours, or at least for me, it's thousands of hours. And, we're really assimilating this information because it's knowledge about, the human body and how it fits into the universe. From the physical to all the energetic components and the root causes of disease in mind, body, and spirit, and pinpointing what that might be, and then working in that direction. I mean, it's a science, it truly is, but it's an ancient science. And so its starting place is entirely different. And even working the mind through that way of thinking versus the way we've been taught to think in all of our education, which is based on modern science. And so it's a completely different starting point and mindset. So it takes some time to sink in.
Yeah. And one of the things that lately, I think in more recent years, that's really been helping me to deepen my relationship with Ayurveda is just the idea of how real long lasting shifts come from ether first. Like we can go about it, I feel like, with like when we talk about the 5 elements, like in the order that they manifest, we can go and like I could take away the smoothie and feel a change or I could do something that's like really tangible.
Yes.
But then on the reverse side, when we have the mind shift change, which is kind of like you were saying, like that awareness of, and that's also the skill of being able to take that same information and use it in another way, because it's like, if we're focused on the list, oh, don't do this or do this, it's really like stuck on that one item. But when we understand the concept, then we're able to adapt it to whatever next thing comes into our life.
And the consequence, right? Like, even if you're following a list, what really matters is, okay, I'm following this. How is it making me feel? Is it making me feel good or not? Because Ayurveda, even Ayurveda practitioners and recommendations, we're making recommendations based on what has traditionally worked for someone else in your situation. And in a sense, it's a hypothesis. And so to really benefit from Ayurveda, the individual needs to pay attention to how that's making them feel and almost learn the language, right? A lot of, felt sensing and, you feel pain. Well, what kind of pain, where it is, how would you describe it? Is it dull? Is it throbbing? Is it sharp? How frequently does it show up, right? There's a lot of really digging and delving into the body and the mind and our experience that people just aren't used to doing. We're not used to doing that. There's so much, avoidance and distraction is what we're used to. And so it's a beauty, that's why the assimilation and that's, learning these skills of awareness. And the more aware a person is, the more they're going to be able to truly practice Ayurveda, truly become Ayurveda. Like, sometimes I think that I'm teaching, Ayurvedic cooking, but my students have told me that what I'm really teaching is an Ayurvedic lifestyle. It really is about a lifestyle.
It is so much. Yeah.
Approach to life. It's the science of life, or the knowledge of life.
It's funny when you said distraction. One of the things during my kind of at-home boot camp, one of the tasks was to not scroll or read while eating. And at the time I had small young children. So as soon as, like, if they were napping or anything, I would, be eating and reading or studying or doing something. So just to sit and eat and not do anything else. And to me, that was like one of those things, like maybe someone had said it to me, but I missed it. Or maybe it's something I thought I was practicing, but I wasn't really truly practicing. And I don't know about you, but even now it's like, now it's a habit to not do something else. But there are times where I can catch myself tempted to want to, read something, check something, do something.
It makes a massive
Yeah.
difference. It makes a big difference. Yeah. Getting into true rest and digest is what that's all about. Sort of letting the body and the blood focus on the stomach and focus on, I like to think of digestion like an orchestra. And we need to give the conductor a chance to figure out what's going on. Right. And if we're constantly distracting the conductor with whatever we're watching, then the conductor has no chance to figure out what the composition is. The composition being the enzymes, and the pH levels, and all the various digestive juices that are needed to coordinate digestion, because it is such a major undertaking and such an important undertaking. I don't know if you, Angela, ever tried, as a Vata individual or with a Vata imbalance. You talked about paying attention while you're eating or being focused on your food while you're eating. Did you ever try resting after eating? Because that's something that most people, you never nap after eating, but actually for a strongly Vata imbalanced person, that can be just the remedy that makes a huge difference. I wonder if you ever tried that.
I have myself tried, like, I think lying on the left side, right, is
It's one way. Yeah.
the recommendations. Yeah. And I think when we're talking about digestion too, for me on this journey, emotional digestion has become such a big piece of the picture. And so I know you wanted to kind of dive into a little bit about functional medicine and biohacking and some of the other things that I've explored through the lens of Ayurveda. And I feel like emotional digestion is a part of that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I know we're I wanted to talk about a lot of things with you, but we're going into like a lot of details, so we might have to do a part 1 and a part 2. Because as an Ayurveda practitioner, it's clear that you have a lot of self-awareness and you understand that the details matter and that you're also teaching as you're talking, right? Through the various examples and what you did and what you didn't do. And while you might not be necessarily pulling out the teaching points, you're sharing in a way where it is teaching. So I love that. So yeah, I,
I know I can get really excited about these things.
let's see. So we're at the stage where you're learning Ayurveda and to treat or deal with your ulcerative colitis. And how does it work? You talked about mindful eating. That
Yep.
wasn't good for you.
I switched to warm, nourishing cooked foods like cooked basmati rice for breakfast or oatmeal, things like that. I ate a lot of very traditional dals and khichdi and basically lentils and different grains with one grounding vegetable and one cooked green and cruciferous vegetable, a lot of ghee, olive fat. So very traditional vegetarian type Ayurvedic diet. And I coasted along for a bit. I weaned off of my prescriptions again, was using Ayurvedic herbs under the supervision of a practitioner. And then I just started experiencing flares, digestive flares, which are urgent, frequent bowel movements with colitis. They're very unpleasant. It's difficult to leave your house. It's not fun at all. So I started to bring back the bone broth because the bone broth and that type of diet was soothing to me, to my digestive system. And so since then, I have sort of fused together Ayurveda and a paleo-ish diet that is soothing to my digestive system right now. And I feel like through my work in sharing Ayurveda, I have come across a lot of students that the traditional foods didn't work with them right now, which could be for a variety of reasons. But meanwhile, to keep eating something that's aggravating your system, just because we think of it as Ayurvedic food, is kind of like, it's not listening to your body, which is the number one place that you're looking for wisdom. It's the purpose of Ayurveda is to point us back to the body's wisdom.
Yep.
And when we get stuck on what we think is the recommended version of Ayurveda and stop listening to our body, we miss the whole point. And so for me, because my first teacher was so heavily vegetarian and meat was not an option, and when legumes started not working for me,
It's not even, I'm sorry, but that's not even Ayurveda.
well, yeah, I had to learn for myself
To know that
I
all foods are good in Ayurveda. It's just what they're good for and who they're good for and how they're good. It's very important that people don't think that Ayurveda is Indian food or vegetarian food or plant-based food. No, all foods are good. So
I read through the text myself, and I read that there are whole chapters describing all of the different meats and the qualities and what they're used for. And meat soup is actually recommended for someone that has severe digestive problems, and,
yeah,
which we could say meat soup and bone broth, it's the modern variation, we could say.
yeah,
I mean, it's not even the modern variation; it's an ancient food, but the words we use now, I guess.
yeah.
So and then I found the book Paleo Vedic. I forget the author's name, but
Interesting. I didn't know there was such a thing.
yeah, there's a doctor out in California, an Ayurvedic doctor out in Sacramento, who has a book on this topic. And, his book basically talks about how split mung is the easiest to digest. And so like if you're going to include that, like the smaller ones are easier to digest. And so I spent a lot of time eating chicken soup, basically, with sweet potatoes and asparagus and things like that, like greens that are a little easier to digest, And I think this is what you were talking about, like listening to your body and noticing the subtleties and recognizing playing around and trying different vegetables and getting stuff from the grocery store that you might not be familiar with. I mean, I was familiar with asparagus, but there's some other things like daikon radishes, things like that, that were not in my wheelhouse growing up, obviously, experimenting with, and different cooking methods and things like that. So just fusing together what a new version of Ayurveda for me.
Yeah, I like it.
And really like encouraging others to do that too.
Yeah, great. I love it. So at this point, you've found a diet that's working for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yay. Huge celebration.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like a balanced diet that kind of takes something from everything that you've tried and puts it together in a more balanced way. So you're not really cutting out any particular food group.
Right. More of a lifestyle then.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got kind of some of everything in there, and that's generally an approach that works for most people. I mean, sometimes if you're in the throes of a major flare up, greatly simplifying does make sense. But I think my understanding, paleo, keto, that kind of thing, it can work, but very few people will stick on such a diet for a long period of time, because at some point it reaches its limit of what it was meant to do. It's not meant to be a long-term or sustainable diet.
Yeah. I kind of think of all of these diets. I've tried a lot of them, Whole30. I think they have their place. They worked for someone, which is why they exist in a written format.
That's it's like, we're very individualized in Ayurveda. And so any approach, any diet,
Yeah.
any superfood, it's got its proponents, it's got the people that it worked for, but you never hear about the 95% of people that didn't work for.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I see the value, especially for some people too. Like when I first followed the GAPS, that's so strict, and it showed me that cutting out every single thing that's in a packaged or processed, like what that did for my gut was really healing. It didn't work long term for me. So it's like these things can work for someone for short term as a reset, or as a guide to what it looks like not to eat anything outside of that list, or especially, or even for someone that doesn't have a strong health condition but just like is addicted to junk food or hasn't it's like it can be a helpful tool, but we have to remember like it's a tool, and you don't need the tool forever. It's okay to drop it when and hopefully move your way toward listening to your body and understanding the qualities of the food so that you can make the choices based on your understanding of how you're going to feel when you eat them.
Yeah, but then just like your experience shows, it takes time to get that understanding and learn that awareness. And so the tool can be a great way to develop it. So I'm really happy that we're creating space for these other approaches, and that we're being kind of open-minded about that. I think even in your experience, it shows that being too strict on an so-called Ayurvedic approach to eating isn't the answer either.
Yeah, it's like the answer is the middle path, but I just see like the pendulum swinging, and it swings too far this way, I come back center, it swings too far this way.
Correct. Yeah, I'm sure I think you're offering some cleanse, like Ayurveda cleanse. I love the Ayurveda cleanse. I find that that's a great experiment for people, right? If they can go 14 days, no processed foods. The way I teach it, you have to cook everything from scratch pretty much to meet the requirements. There's restrictions of foods in there. So, I think that would be a great way for people to experience that and potentially change a lot of how they think and feel about cooking and how that affects them. So an Ayurveda cleanse could be a great way, because the way the Ayurveda cleanse is a very balanced approach, although it includes those components of eliminating processed foods, limiting, your foods, but still having enough in there so that a person feels nourished and full and good throughout the cleanse.
Yeah. I don't even like the word cleanse because it just conjures up. Well, I just feel like in modern times, the word can be connected with deprivation, and the Ayurvedic version is there's no deprivation. It's like,
Yes, that's
um,
the important point. But
yeah.
it kind of works in marketing because
Yes, I know we have to use the word, but that's why I feel like you use the word so that people understand what it is. But then when it's like, once you open the paperwork or the file or you learn what it is, it's like, oh, I get to eat. I'm not going to be starving and cranky.
it's a nourishing cleanse,
Mhm.
right? And I know that you were talking about panchakarma as something that could be like a big detox experience, or it could be a nourishing experience. And yeah, it's important to make that distinction, for a lot of people if they're very, ill and they're dealing with, chronic disease, especially autoimmune, especially vata type imbalances, and pitta, even like, cleansing is not is not the answer. We want to be nourishing, and there's ways to nourish and cleanse at the same time, very, very gently. And I think that's particular to Ayurveda, isn't it? Like,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful practice within Ayurveda that people could explore.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I love about it. And part of the cleanse that I put together, it's really just super simple, but a part of it that I think is essential is taking a break from technology or reducing it as much as possible. Because of that mental digestion piece for me, I just think that the mental digestion piece um has been like, I can't ignore that for myself. And I see how for others, like, if we're going to basically, if we look at Ayurvedic food cleansing as reducing stimuli, like reducing
Right, right.
spiciness or reducing crunchiness and just really like simplifying down to the most nourishing aspects, the mental piece of reducing as much external stimuli as possible and going inward during that time.
I like that. Yeah, the idea that we're really digesting our lives, right? All of the stimulus that comes through our senses. And so yeah, thanks for pointing that out, because I don't think I didn't put that bow on it in terms of cleanse. And so I feel like I missed a point. I might have taken us off direction, but let's try to move to summation of your healing experience. It sounds like that mental digestion is kind of a current piece and an important piece. So do you want to talk about that a little bit more for yourself, and how maybe what you've learned in that area, and how that's making a difference for you?
Yeah, I just think that, especially for anyone that has any digestive conditions, when we are not digesting well, I feel like energetically our Agni, like, it's such a like big concept. Like, how can I make this super simple? But basically, you know, in Ayurveda, Agni is the word for digestion, and it's the word to digest your food and your drink, but it's also the word to digest your experiences and your conversations. And that's why we don't want to read or scroll while we're eating, because then it's sort of like half of the energy is digesting the information we take in, and the other half is digesting the food. So we're not giving the food its full proper amount of digestion. And I think that when our lives are over busy or we're overwhelmed by our life, our energy, it's like the energy, there's not that nourishing container for it. So, like how I mentioned, I used to go to vigorous yoga practice, and now I've practiced yoga every single day for 14 years. I've like never skipped a day ever. But what is my yoga practice? And since 2020, I had a pretty bad flare in 2020. So I started practicing yoga nidra, which is just for anyone listening that hasn't tried it yet, it's magical. It's wonderful. Please start today. Chew your food and do yoga nidra, and your life will change. So it's like this meditative state right? I know you must practice yoga nidra too, right?
No, actually, I'm not a yoga person. I don't do yoga.
It is basically a meditation that takes you into a state between awake and asleep. So you can lie down in shavasana, you can lie in your bed. I like to do it on the floor with my shins propped because that's really nice for your spine.
So
And
Shavasana is just like, is that the corpse pose?
yeah, shavasana is corpse pose, but in my yoga journey, my understanding is that when you're in that total corpse pose, that can aggravate the low back for some people. So a really nice variation is to lie on the floor with your calves on like a chair or your bed or a stack of cushions. And that,
Like raised up. Like
yes, exactly. And when you do that, that lower back arch will flatten toward the ground. So then from the Ayurvedic perspective, we're opening up that Sushumna channel, like the spinal column. So we're allowing the energy to move more freely, which helps to pacify and ground Vata dosha. So to just lie on the floor with your shins up on a couch or something like that is a Vata pacifying practice that's lovely for just about anybody. And then when you throw in a guided yoga nidra practice, yoga nidra basically step by step relaxes the physical body. Just like any meditation practice, like a guided meditation practice, you could fall asleep. You could stay totally awake and waking consciousness the whole entire time and focus on the voice. You could drift in and out thinking about your to-do list and coming back. All of that's totally fine. I mean, I fell asleep like every day for a year when I was doing it. That's because my body needed rest. So like no judgment. I think that's really important. It's kind of like that middle pathway and grace with Ayurveda, same with yoga nidra and meditation and everything else. But to be in the yoga nidra state is, in the modern language, would be to be like in the theta brainwave state. You're in a soft, pliable brainwave state. And so yoga nidra always comes with a sankalpa, which is an intention.
okay.
We can choose a practice really for you. So for me, for one whole year, every day I did this 20-minute soma practice by my teacher. So for people to do a 20-minute practice on soma and put your brain into a malleable state and have an intention on soma and allowing nectar to wash over you.
Soma is the cooling lunar energy.
Yes. Because Pitta people are solar people, have a lot of masculine solar Surya energy. To balance that, practice like just how traditional Ayurveda would recommend moon bathing, like actually going outside and letting the moonlight touch your skin. This is like another way to get moon energy, for example, would be to do like a yoga nidra on the moon. So for me, practicing yoga nidra, and it basically started because it was pandemic times, couldn't leave the house. I was not feeling well. I just put the kids in the other room with some cartoons, put on the headphones, and would do this practice. But it's kind of like, every time like we try something from Ayurveda that you really feel yourself,
Yes.
feels good and you want to keep doing it. It's like, I could give you all the list. There's so much modern studies. I mean, they're using yoga nidra to help people with PTSD and all kinds of stuff. And basically, from my perspective, what I believe why it's so helpful is because it gets us out of that conscious mind we're not totally asleep. We're in that middle space where we can soften.
So it lets your mind focus on something because the mind wants to focus on something. And then you're being guided to, I guess, a helpful state for what you're trying to reduce. In this case, heat and inflammation, right? And promote more and lightness too, right? You're promoting more of the heavy quality, the relaxing quality, the grounded quality, the peaceful qualities.
I guess it's kind of like an Ayurvedic cleanse, how you're getting both nourished and detoxed at the same time.
Ah, nice.
Because you are grounded, you are just lying there, you are getting like, it's so Vata pacifying and healing because you are, I like to do it with covers on an eye pillow. Like it's like getting super nourished and then you're sort of like clearing out a little bit.
Wow, this is amazing. I want to share this. So we're going to put in the links, we're going to put 1 or 2 recommendations from you
Yeah.
for guided meditation that people can look up. and they've got your description of how to do it. And yeah, we're going to share this. This is awesome.
Yeah. So I feel like for me, these pieces are part of the Ayurveda picture, because this is like taking something, and I do it every single day now. I do it every afternoon, like in that transition from Pitta to Vata time.
Nice.
I pick up my kids. I leave at 3 to pick them up. So I don't take any appointments from 2 to 3. I have an appointment with myself.
Nice. Yeah.
Um,
Good modeling.
Yeah. So I do yoga nidra every afternoon, and it just worked out. Although I think there's no bad time. You can do it in the morning or the night. But if you're able to do it in this Pitta Vata transition, I just think that having a grounding practice during that transition, and even if someone has to work like in an office, just taking 5 deep breaths or drinking your tea at that time, like having some practice that's grounding during that time.
Nice. A grounding practice at 2:00. And I just heard somebody say recently that if you want to ground your nervous system to improve your sleep, you don't want to be doing that right before bed, because that was my first thought, is you do yoga nidra before bed, but you're doing it in the afternoon, and I bet it's helping your sleep.
Yeah, that's exactly, whenever I work with anyone that has sleep issues, it's kind of like we were saying, you should focus on what you're doing before bed. I'm not saying that's not important, but usually things fall apart in the afternoon. So if you can back it up before dinner and kind of do a little reset somewhere between 2 and 5, even if it's yoga nidra, even if it is going for, I think that the word grounding depends on the person. So some people, taking a lap around the block with their dog is their grounding practice.
It's true. I have a client, and I said, so what is grounding for you, right? What is like, she's like going for a walk, and she's highly Vata. And I'm kind of like, I was like, well, what about, sitting on the couch cross-legged, like, like with a blanket? And she's like, that sounds like death. I was like, okay. Well,
Yeah.
if that's where we're at, that movement is grounding, then I think we can work on that. I think, feeling like being stationary is death is a little bit of an extreme position. Don't you think?
I do. I think, but I've also experienced like a yoga teacher saying like, you need to meditate for 30 minutes. And I wake up and I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, I need to pack the lunches. Oh my gosh, I need to do this. Like, I'm like, what is the point of that meditation? I'm just sitting there in a frenzy of like, I need to get this day going. So
True enough. Yes.
I think like, this is that like meeting yourself where you're at. Like, I wasn't ready to quit power yoga because I liked my community. I could have quit the heat. I never even liked the heat. It was like part of the package of the community, but I wasn't ready for that break yet. I had to work my way there. And I think it's kind of the same with the client that refuses or can't sit because their mind's not there yet. So it's like, if they always walk with a podcast, can they leave their phone at home and just go for a walk and look at the trees?
Good advice.
That's a baby step, because connecting to nature is a form of grounding.
Correct.
So it's like, okay, well, what if your challenge every day is go for a 10-minute walk with no technology and focus on your footprints? Like Thich Nhat Hanh has a really beautiful meditation where it's like breathing in for 4 steps and then breathing out for 4 steps. So it's like, that's
meditation.
Right. It's like the pathway. And for me, one of the reasons I don't like yoga nidra at night is because I do use my phone recording. And I don't want to have that. I don't want to have like technology, because even though it would be okay, but if I fall asleep, then the phone's next to my head and not in the other room. And also, I don't know about you, but I might open this for a meditation and then I'm like, oh, let me check something. And I don't even want to be tempted. So I'd rather just be totally unplugged, no guided meditation before bed for me.
Gotcha. But no, I love the idea of grounding in the afternoon, because I'm sure that just puts you in a good place for the rest of the day, right?
Yes.
And there is a lot of the day left. Like for me, it's my lunch eating practice. Like, I prepare the lunch and I sit with the lunch, and then I take some rest after the lunch. So the rest after the lunch, I managed to completely break from my day. And I think that's what the yoga nidra does too. It's like you completely cut off from, I find you get up in the morning, you're feeling good usually, and then all the demands of the day start piling up one after another as you go through the morning. And for me, that lunch practice is that break. It's like when I take my break and I go and focus on food, I get away from it, and then I come back and it truly feels like a reset. And I think it's the reset that's important, right?
Yes, I agree. I don't think that it has to be at a certain time. I think it's just like what works in your schedule, and when, someone else can't tell you that you're grounded.
Correct. Yeah, it's a very individualized and personal
Mhm.
experience. But I just love it because when you were talking about yoga nidra, like your face was just lit up. Like it's clear that this is the thing that is working for you. And it does sound very appetizing. It sounds very appealing. Yeah. So we're going to
Yeah.
share it. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. So I think like, to sum up, you have gone through a lot with your health,
Mhm.
and you have put a lot of effort into learning how to improve it and feel better. I mean, this podcast is Eat, Live, and Feel Better. And you're just the perfect example, of someone who's taken so much effort to try new things and to be proactive and to learn along the way. And that ultimately led you to Ayurveda, which is super cool. But then you found that even Ayurveda is not the be all and end all for you, and kind of expanding your knowledge and understanding along the way. So, you through your personal experience, you've learned so much. And of course, you work with clients. And I just want to finish off letting people know that you have an amazing podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's the Simple Ayurveda podcast. I started it 5 years ago as I was falling in love with Ayurveda. I just wanted to share it. I didn't have any plans for what it would become, but over the past 5 years, I've gotten to interview all of my dream list. So, like Dr. Robert Svoboda was on there last year, and just different, like I love to read. So I've invited all my favorite authors on there.
How much you must have learned. I mean, you have hundreds of episodes. It's
Yeah.
so impressive. And you also do solo episodes, sharing your knowledge with others. It's just such an amazing resource.
Thanks. It was weekly for 4 years. And then at the beginning of 2023, I decided to slow down and do twice a month um, to be a little more sustainable. So I joke my podcast, I share so much personal stories, and it's embarrassing. It's like all the real stuff no one tells you about Ayurveda. I mean, I have an episode on, like I mentioned, like tips for an Ayurveda colonoscopy. Like everything you know to apply Ayurveda, because it would be lovely to live in a little bubble where I just get to eat Ayurveda food and live an Ayurveda lifestyle and not have to deal with anything. But that's not my karma in this life. And I've come to realize that my part of my dharma here is to be a bridge and, try out these different things like Paleo Vedic, and talk about everything that I learn in modern medicine. Everything that I try, I always filter it through the lens of Ayurveda. So I look at, how does this apply to the 5 elements? How does this apply to digestion, to Agni? And what really makes sense. And I share that process on the podcast, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that is so precious, so precious. And thank you for being so vulnerable and open with your audience. I think, people definitely have to check out your podcast. And then you decided to start an Ayurveda school. Like, what? You're actually Professor Angela Perger. So tell us about that in case people want to check out your school.
Yeah, thanks. I run a very intimate cohort of a Ayurveda health counselor training program. So I have a bachelor's degree in journalism and then a master's of science in education. I started studying special education when my son was a toddler, and I almost have a second master's degree, but when it was time for the student teaching of the special education, I was already teaching at the yoga studio every day, and I couldn't put my son in daycare to go do that. So I have a lot of understanding of different learning styles and the way that the brain works, and ways to accommodate different learners through that. I've taught I was a first grade and a second grade teacher in inner city Philadelphia, and I have substitute taught pre-K through 8th grade. I've volunteered with children in Peru and Mexico, and I've taught preschool yoga at my son's preschool. I've taught yoga to all sorts of people. I've taught yoga to family yoga, prenatal yoga, mommy and me, baby yoga. So I started putting together yoga trainings at the studio that I worked at in person on yin yoga and children's yoga. And then when I became an Ayurveda health counselor, I put together Ayurveda for yoga teachers. And that was my first online class right before the pandemic started. I kind of started online teaching then, and created the Simple Ayurveda Collective, which is a low-cost membership. We have a new theme. Now it's every couple of months. The first few years, it was every month, but now we're spaced out a little since there's such a hub of information in there. And basically, when I was in grad school, I got this intuitive hit that I would be a professor. And I remember sitting in class laughing because I said to God or the universe, like, what on earth would I be a professor of? Like, what do I know about? And at the time, I had never even heard of Ayurveda yet. So it's like I got this hit that I would be a professor. So when I started teaching Ayurveda for yoga teachers, one of my in-person students took that online class. She loved it and invited me to apply to be a professor of Ayurveda at a university. So I went through the process. I mean, I had to put together a syllabus. I had to put together like examples of the work that I would have the college students do. I had to present in front of a board with the dean. It got voted unanimously to become a class. So I teach the foundations of Ayurveda as an adjunct professor at a public university. Done that for a year and a half. And then I also, a few years ago, got an intuitive hit that I would create an Ayurveda health counselor program. When these things come, I just know like there's a time and a place, and I don't need to rush it because it will unfold as it's meant to be. So I put that together. The first group began in September of 2022, and they're finishing up. The students in the cohort, we have a monthly group session, and then each one works with me individually. So they graduate when they're ready individually. So I've never seen another program like this where they actually get one-on-one support with me for the entire year. So it's like a personal mentorship with studies. So yeah, the first group's finishing up, and the second group just started in September of 2023. We just got going.
Incredible. And you're able to fully accredit people as an Ayurveda health counselor in the end?
Yes, because I am an Ayurveda practitioner, and I set up a legal school in Florida because I have the Master's of Science. I was able to do that. And then through APNA, the Ayurvedic Association of Professionals in North America, as the program is accredited through them.
APNA. Okay. Yeah. So today we've mentioned NAMA and APNA, the two Ayurveda associations in the US.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm just so impressed. Like I said, like you are just an impressive person. So amazing. Everything you've done, all of this, despite your health challenges. Like, I think you're such a shining example of so many things. And I'm just so thrilled to have had the time to speak with you today and get to know you better. It's just such a thrill. If people want to get to know you or follow up with you or find your information, where should we send them?
I'm at simpleayurveda.com. So there they'll find the link to the podcast and Instagram and email and all of that goodness. And I want to say thank you to you too. We met through you putting together such an amazing collaboration project. And I know that takes a lot of effort. And I think that it's really amazing when you personally took charge and brought people together in that way and found a way to sprinkle Ayurveda. And the beauty of that too is that the people that participate might resonate with a certain person's style. And so it's like Ayurveda and yoga, there's a personality and a flavor to it. It is a science for sure. But there's also that art piece. And so just knowing who you'll resonate with and like bringing people together and finding the right partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm really love collaboration, and I don't see it as a competition. We may offer some of the same things, but people are going to resonate with who they resonate with. And that's the world we live in today. We're looking for, like you said, the trust and the perfect match and the direction. And, I think that you're so relatable. I love it. I think people really relate with you. Thank you for being here on Eat, Live, and Feel Better podcast. That's a wrap. Bye for today.